Roll on, Columbia, roll on. Roll on, Columbia, roll on. Clean energy's turning our darkness to dawn. Roll on, Columbia, roll on. Renewable power surrounds us today. Here's Lewis and Mason have all shown the way. Our town council members just have to vote. We're all in the very same boat.
Experience. Steve Johnson is going to be talking to us. He was the executive director for the Washington PUB Association, retired in 2010, so pretty fresh. He's been an advocate. He's been an advocate for green consumer-owned utilities for many years and supported the electrification of Jefferson PUB in 2013, when it became a virtually 100% carbon-free and the first new nonprofit system in the state in many years. He's led the effort to establish a clean, carbon-free nonprofit utility on Mainbridge Island. And prior to joining the Washington PUB Association in 1986, he taught political science at the University of Alaska Anchorage for 11 years. And he wants us to know he's also a husky and a cooter.
Thanks a lot, Helen. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this forum and in this beautiful town on a beautiful day. Together with Barney and Randall, we have traveled the state a little bit where communities, and there's quite a few kind of embryonic public power stuff going on around the state that hasn't gelled, including Randall and my own community on Bainbridge Island, which I'll tell you a little bit about. The second thing I have to say to you is pretty much my presentation has been covered. Terrific job by Jim and Randall, I think, in the run-up to this, but I'm not giving up my spot anyhow. And so some of this may be a little bit redundant of the job they did, but they covered a whole heck of a lot of it. Maybe I can talk a little bit more about the kind of campaign that will be required to bring these things about. And I'm a public power advocate and a little more lukewarm about Green Direct and other approaches, in part because saving the planet. We got 12 years. That's what board ties told us. 12 years to do this. That's a nanosecond. You know, I retired 10 years ago. We don't have much time. And are these incremental steps going to do it? The other thing is, I see public power as kind of a revolution. A lot of things we've talked about, including in our community on Bainbridge Island, were ways we could get off carbon. But what did that mean for PSE? You know, Jefferson PUD, they got off PSE and are now 97% carbon free. So among the assets, as well as the somewhat more expensive costs up there, is remember that. That's what the community got up there. And that was a major motivator for a lot of people that they're 97% carbon free. So here's the challenge. Here's what we're focused on, and I bet most of the people in the room, except maybe the PSE guy, are here because of this climate issue. So what's our strategy? Well, some of you may have seen this cartoon. It's kind of old, but it's, you know, the dinosaurs are at a big conference, and the chairman is talking to them, and he says, "The picture's bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we have a brain about the size of a walnut." So there's where we are. So what's the strategy? Well, this is the Normandy invasion. Huge operation. So what's a similar crisis? I mean, to do this in 12 years is unheard of in human history, with a minor possible exception in terms of focus and effort at the time of World War II and after Pearl Harbor. So the American response to Pearl Harbor, in 4 years, we created a 12 million man army when we had an army about the size of the Netherlands. We built 50,000 airplanes. We invented and built the atomic bomb, we established the United Nations, we won the war, and we rebuilt Europe, and so forth. So we did it. Yesterday, by the way, I was at a, it was relevant, at a Veterans Day event at Ingledown High School, an honorable veteran, so they invited me. I was really pleased to go there. But as I looked at the audience, and I didn't say this in my remarks, I just recently read that 50% of the soldiers that landed in Normandy on June 6th were graduates of the high school class of 1943. 50% of them were recent high school graduates. So I guess that also tells us about the scale of the effort and the willingness of the country to commit to what had to be done to win the war. So maybe there's the model. I don't know how many of you are optimistic about what we can do in 12 years, but I don't think we're going to get there incrementally. I don't think we're going to get there by buying a little green power here. We've got to do something revolutionary, and I think it's public power. So what's the best local strategy? Is public power. PSE doesn't care. PSE Big Oil. And Big Oil killed carbon pricing, two initiative efforts that we had. I guess they didn't contribute money in the second one. You know about that their integrated resource plan has them staying at this 59 or 60% fossil fuels until 2035. That's 5 years beyond the 12 years, right? They're going to be ready to do something 5 years after the 12 years that we've got left to save the planet. And as Jim pointed out, most people know, transportation is the most important sector in terms of carbon, not the utility sector, at least not the utility sector in the Northwest. So, but can public power play a role in electrifying transportation? Well, of course it can. And Austin Electric has taken a leading role and has, starting way back, to electrify transportation. They have a plug-in partner program they started that went across the whole nation, came from Austin, so it's a great creative public power utility. And this kind of creativity comes from public power utilities, not so much from the power companies. But public power is not just about carbon. This cartoon's, Climate Summit, another one of these things. And one member of the audience says, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? And then energy independence, preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, and, the things public power provides, like democratic control over what happens in your community, like low cost-based power, like reliability and responsiveness to the community's desires in terms of equity in treatment of customers that are disadvantaged or low income and so on. So it is public power. Some of this has been kind of covered. They are democratically not for-profit, democratically controlled electric utilities. There's 2,500 of them nationally. There's only about 55, I think, investor-owned utilities in the nation, the consolidated power companies. So there's a lot of them scattered across the nation, and a lot of different models that Jim went into about how this might be done. One of the more intriguing ones is the cooperative model. So there's some really successful cooperatives. They're wonderful to visit. Jim and I had this experience with Salem, which is just a model utility, but I spent some time with Orcas Power and Light up in the San Juan Islands, served that thing. Wonderful creative utility that's gotten them into telecommunications and so on. Rates, not so low. But they have undersea cables to deliver power and a lot of challenges in that regard. So they're a great model, and something interesting might be done, and then Jim would be even more helpful in regard to that. So we already know that there's 62 public power systems of different types in Washington and 3 investor-owned utilities. And then there's this relationship with the Bonneville Power Administration. And new public power utilities have been created in other parts of the country where they didn't have one of these large federal agencies to provide power to them. They had to put it together themselves, find power resources and so on. So we're hugely advantaged here. and we have a rich history around the creation of the Bonneville Power Administration, a New Deal, Great Depression response, where that great agency was created to serve a 4-state region. And public power went on the march. So coming out of the Depression, rural areas not being served and so on, the public utility districts in particular were created. And key person in that was Homer T. Bone. Homer T. Bone was the municipal attorney for the city of Tacoma. He, together with Grange, came up with the idea, the Washington State Grange Farm Organization, of could they take the model of the cities, like Tacoma Power, and spread it to the rural areas by creating a municipal government to serve those areas. And he campaigned for that, and it happened. And it was revolutionary across the state. 29 PUDs were created. Every single one of them, the issue was to get into electricity. This was even before they were providing water service, and they now provide some other utility services. So Kitsap PUD was created to get into the electric business. And then there were a lot of machinations, lawyers, the election of employees of Puget Sound Energy and so on that frustrated that, and it didn't happen in a significant number of communities, but it did happen in other places like Snohomish PD and Grace Harbor PUDs, where, by the way, it used to be served by, as Jefferson PD was, by Puget Sound. Good, pushing the wrong button here. So you've seen this slide, so I'll move on. I want to talk a little bit about some neighboring utilities here. Silicon Electric, I grew up there, or right on the boundary between Lakewood and Silicon, and used to ride my bike down to Silicon to the dock and watch the convicts come and go on a ferry to out on Neal Island, fish off the dock, so on. And it's a great little sleepy little community. Somebody here may live there, right, and be a customer of Silicon Power. But that utility has 4 employees that operate the utility. They do a great job. Their rates are 50% less than PSC. Years ago, they paid off their capital investment in the utility. But of course, they're first on a lot of things. They were the first Protestant church in the state of Washington, the first jail, and the first public library. So, and they were one of the first public power utilities. So they do a great job with 4 employees. How do they do that? Well, a big part of that is 2 things. It's their relationship with the Bonneville Power Administration, which, when you're a customer of the Bonneville Power Administration, they don't just ship you power in a box and then it's your problem about how it's shaped and used and all of that kind of thing. You're partnered with them, have a relationship with them, and they help you in many ways. And they have a legal obligation, by the way, for a new entity to deliver the power to you. So on Bainbridge Island, PSC would maintain informs that, well, it's going to be a big problem for you getting this power to the island if you split off, because the only power lines that come here are ours. And that problem was solved by the Bonneville Power Administration, which would make sure that power would get to you. The other is mutual aid agreements. Tacoma is a great neighbor partner to them, as well as, I think they have mutual aid agreements with 20 other public power utilities. And so in the event of a storm or needs or something, they just call these folks up. They work together. Among the PUDs, we used to have quarterly meetings on mutual aid agreements and how we can help each other, particularly in emergencies. So that's a big advantage for public power, this economy of scale. How come their rates are so much lower than PSC, economies of scale in terms of reliability? Well, the answer is public power utilities help each other. Tacoma Power, you've already heard a little bit about them. It's a big utility. It's been in business more than 100 years. It has bills 25% less than PSC, and it's almost carbon-free. And like Bonneville, this number here, as I think Jim pointed out, what this really is their power plants are all carbon-free. So are Bonneville's. They don't have any fossil fuel burning power plants of their own. But these bigger utilities, particularly Bonneville, they need to buy and sell power in the market to make that vast system work. And in the process, some resources come in and go out that have a little bit of fossil fuel. Very hard to trace where that is, but they're getting power, say, from Utah or something. And that's why we don't say that these utilities are 100% carbon free. So Jefferson PUD, we're going to hear later a lot from Bernie about what happened there and so on. But I was involved a bit with them when they were established in 2008. Their creation was triggered in part by the company announcing it was going to sell to foreign owners. Hedge fund, complex hedge fund kind of arrangement with Macquarie Corporation out of Sydney, Australia. And there were some, this is kind of a nightmare for PSE, there's some business types and retired business types in Fort Ludlow and so on, one guy in particular, who really understood what that meant and said, why don't we as a community go to PSE and say, instead of saying it to these foreigners, why don't you sell it to us? And that turned out to be a pretty good deal for PSE. The numbers I looked at are that rates are basically about the same as PSE. When PSE raised its rates after they'd been in its business, when PUD went into business, it's kept the rates for several years exactly what they'd been in the PSE. That when PSE had a rate increase, they actually dropped below. It's a little complicated because of something called a residential exchange. But the rates are very close to what they are in PSE, and then it's made complicated by this service charge, which Jim's pointed out has some issues about equity in terms of having a basic charge. But the bills are close to what they are for PSE. The other thing is, a significant amount of money now stays in the county. PSE had 2 employees up there, except during the campaign when they added a couple of employees and opened an office in downtown Port Townsend. So that was open, and they gave away a lot of light bulbs and things. And but they closed it right after the sale of the company. But this is the number of employees they have now. So competitive rates. Now they have their own employees in the county. This has a lot to do with reliability, by the way. Both Port Townsend, Jefferson PUD, and Bainbridge Island have no crews based in their service area. On Bainbridge Island, crews to restore our system, and we have the highest outage rate anywhere on PSE system, and poor reliability, and have to come across the bridge. No crew. But during the campaign, they based the truck on Bainbridge Island, and it drove around all the time to be parked at the grocery store, stuff like that. But I haven't seen it since the city council tabled the motion on this, so we'll see if it comes back. But anyway, these are great local jobs. As Jim pointed out, PUD employees are well paid. They're family wage jobs, and it's good to have those kinds of people in your community. On Bainbridge Island, we have a big effort in terms of dealing with the big earthquake when it comes. We're right there at the target of what could happen there. We're doing a lot about that. These are the kind of people that are great to have in the community, often trains, EMTs, and stuff like that. So, Bainbridge Island, not yet. So 2015, we kicked off an island power campaign, and the city responded positively to the idea. We had a great city council. We had a feasibility study that they funded. It cost $100,000. That was, the power company targeted that a lot. And the results of that study was that this focused only on kind of the financial viability. This would be a reasonable business deal from the beginning for the community. It was that rates would be either at, possibly slightly lower, possibly slightly above what they were with PSE. And but PSE, you know, I've been around this before in Jefferson County, but they did a phenomenally good effort of pushing back on us. They had a number of town halls, you know, sounded like it was run by the community. They gave away barbecues, and that was great. My daughter said, well, Dad, I know I'm for public power, but Ben and I need a barbecue. And they gave away, light bulbs. They had focus groups on how to do this. They did push polling. You get a polling call. Do you think the socialist utility would? I'm exaggerating here. I don't want to use that exact word, but
would be a good idea for the island and the culture of the island, and so forth. So they pushed back really hard, and they put a lot of money in. They announced a new solar project for the senior center, and stuff we hadn't heard about before this campaign got going. And the result was, and I don't think this is the end at all, but the city council voted to table the project in June 2017. So it's still out there, and our franchise is up in about 6 years. So that may be an opportunity to repitch our case. And then the city council, believe it or not, they changed the makeup of the city council in the election, and it's less warm to the public idea. So is anybody here a public official, or elected public official? Yeah, okay. Well,
PUD commissioner.
PUD commissioner.
You remember me.
Oh, I do remember you. Yeah, great. Well, you know, be forewarned, you know, that's where the heat's going to come, but great things are not achieved without some struggle. Bonneville Power Administration, lots already been said about this. This wonderful agency with a wonderful kind of history that at least I'm kind of addicted to about how it was created and what it did. But its basic New Deal mission, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and so on, was not only to electrify rural areas in the Northwest, and FDR came up with the Rural Electrification Administration, which was the co-ops. We ended up having a little different mechanism with PUDs in Oregon, Washington as a way of delivering power, but also flood control. There were terrible problems with floods in Portland, other places, rural irrigation and development of the Columbia River Basin, all those wineries and orchards and stuff that now exist couldn't be there if it hadn't been for that. And they operate. So Bonneville doesn't own these power plants, but 100% of its power plants are carbon free, including the nuclear plant. That's where their power supply comes from. If they are to need more power, because as Jim said, they have a legal obligation to provide a new public entity that comes around that qualifies in certain ways, has a right under the law to ask for power from the Bonneville Power Administration. But they don't have a right necessarily to the lowest cost product. And so if they were larger, there's a set aside of a little bit of vintage hydropower that you could get. For Bainbridge, it would have been enough to serve the entire island. It's 50 megawatts. For the city of Olympia, it wouldn't be enough. But the agency, if that load was put on them by the city of Olympia, would acquire power. So there would have the complication that you'd be paying for current prices for power. But that could be a very good thing too, because they're expanding that resource by acquiring more wind, solar, and so on, and having the Bonneville Power Administration manage it for you would be a good thing. And of course, it's a federal agency that also cost-based rates, and its cost of borrowing is very low because it's essentially treasury monies that they, in that rate they buy at. And as I mentioned, they're really a partner with public power to help you out. They're a little careful about helping with the formation of the public power utilities. But they push back on efforts to sabotage their ability to serve a new utility as they should have. And once you're in business, as in Jefferson PUD, Marty will tell us a little bit about this, they can be very helpful in terms of getting up and running. Bonneville's customers can be, most of them are all requirements customers. They get all their power from Bonneville like silicon. But some are partial requirements customers. That's a complication, but also an opportunity. It would mean that a utility here, say in Olympia, wouldn't necessarily have to buy all the power from Bonneville. The city of Centralia has its own little hydro plant. That's a good thing. Then they get to balance their power from Bonneville. I mentioned this transmission obligations. So PSE's strategy, block publics, I've already talked about this, but you know, that company has been threatened by public power almost since the beginning. Seattle City Light competed head-to-head, and there's these old photographs of the 1920s where power lines ran down, up and down both sides of the street, and finally the city bought out all of PSE, which had served the city of Seattle. So they have a lot of experience in battling public power, and they've been fairly successful, particularly in more recent decades, in preventing the emergence of more public power systems. So some historical reasons for that. And a core part of their strategy is to be part of the community. I think they would say we just support the community, but they, our case, the Chamber of Commerce was chaired by a PSE middle management employee that didn't live on Bainbridge Island, and they were a platinum contributor to the Chamber of Commerce and so on. A lot of nonprofits got money or have banquets sponsored by them. They contracted, it seemed to me like they added contracts on Bainbridge, which had a lot of big professional clients. All of a sudden, these folks who were in energy consultants and so on appeared at meetings not sympathetic to public power. And, some other stories you can share about those kinds of things. So anyway, they comprehensive strategy, be part of the community in those ways at relatively low cost, and divert, dissemble, and then sadly this lawyer issue is a tough one because including sort of rumors in one public power case in 2008, widely spread that the people who might be on the steering committee of the pro-public power organization of the county where it was not successful, not Jefferson County, might be personally liable. And so, that's not the case, but you can't be personally liable for exercising your rights in this democracy, but it can be very intimidating. And and just spreading uncertainty and doubt and concern about the risks of public power. Well, utility provider risk analysis, which is more risky. This goes back to label my query, but public power, the city's credit ratings are all pretty much sterling, and unless their borrowing rates are lower, cost of money, to the extent that sort of a borrowing rate that PSE faces, they face much higher rates. Climate risk for the community, very high. Carbon tax risk. If 1631 had passed, we PSE customers would have seen our rates go up. Meanwhile, Jefferson PD escaped. They escaped that. They also escaped any schemes to have stranded asset charges for these coal plants. And I heard a lot of talk after they got into business that PSE was working on ways that if there were new municipalizations, they'd reach back and as part of how that happened, they would try and recover monies for the cost of these power plants that they say, well, we built them to serve that load, now you've got to pay them for these as well. And the business risk for customers, that's one that they often bring up. Could little old Lacey, Silicon, Bainbridge Island, is a big business risk. Well, here's the record of success. Washington nonprofit utilities, none has ever been sold back to private power. One of the things, when this happens in Snohomish County, there's never been a movement saying, no, we liked it better back when we had private power. A few folks up in Jefferson County grumbled for a year or two because there were some problems with bills and a few things. As the new utility guy, we ought to go back to. It'll never happen. It has not happened in the state, and that's part of the proof of the value of public power. None of them have ever gone bankrupt. Of course, there's been a few financial scandals on a small scale over the years. And hundreds of millions of dollars have been saved by public power customers. Neighboring utilities, if you stayed with PSE, versus those communities or neighboring communities that went with public power. And public power has better service and reliability. Randall went over some data on this, but we have Peninsula Light Nurse, it's a great cooperative utility based in Gig Harbor, and they have a terrain like us because PSC will come in and say, well, we choose to live in a place with a lot of trees, you know, so it's just one of the things, 20 things about us, that our power has to go out all winter. And, well, Peninsula Lake has terrain very similar to Bainbridge Island, lots of trees and so on. It's 5 times as reliable. And your public power communities are owners, not renters. You know, over the years, all you get are a bunch of rent receipts when you get your receipts. Places like Jefferson County now, they're investing in a very valuable community asset. So, I'm going to make these kind of kickoff questions. Will this be easy to do here in South Puget Sound? No, it'll be really hard. Is it doable? Yes, it is. It's been done 62 times, sometimes under very difficult circumstances, and sometimes repeated efforts. The city of Springfield, Oregon, 3 times it was on the ballot over a period of years. Each time they educated the public more and finally they succeeded. So, strategic timing. You know, often these new public power utilities have been created when something was going on in the environment, like PSC's sale to a foreign owner, which triggered that community, among other advantages to so, as we think about public power, partially we're getting ready for things that could go wrong, including these high-risk elements of where the power company is, like carbon tax risk and so on, where instead of 25% higher on average across the state, they might be significantly higher. Who's going to do it? I'd say if it's going to happen in here, some people in this room will be behind it. Some people will get a bone in their teeth, decide to do it, get together, create a little committee, figure it out, understand it better. The leaders will emerge. That's what happened in Jefferson County. That's what happened in the story of every one of these communities. Somebody made it happen, and it's been done many times. So, that's it for there, and I guess we'll hold questions until.
Okay, brief speaker. Okay, so our final speaker today, before we get into discussion and question and answers, is Barney Burke, who's from Port Townsend. And he moved to Port Townsend after 20 years in planning and economic development in the Bay Area. And he's been a reporter for the Port Townsend Leader for 10 years. He reported on Prop 1, which was the 2008 Citizens Initiative authorizing Jefferson PUD to launch a power utility. After that, Barney was a Jefferson PUD commissioner himself for 7 years, during which time the PUD purchased and began operating the state's first new public power utility in half a century. So, Barney.
Well, thanks a lot. It's worth it to come all the way down here today and meet some new folks. And, you know, no one's paid my way to be down here. I'm down here because I'm interested in dealing with the carbon problem. So I want to talk to you about that. And as she mentioned, I was a reporter at the Port Townsend Leader and covered Prop 1, which was a citizens initiative, not a PUD initiative, citizens initiative in 2008. And I think one of the more interesting stories they did during that campaign was looking at all the rates of different utilities in Washington. And it made people wonder why PSC's rates were higher than most of the other utilities. For example, PSC's rates were higher than Jefferson Cloud PUD right next door to us. The PSC is a state-regulated utility, so they had to be pretty good betting with both their rates and their rate of return on investment. So why wouldn't a company with more than 1 million customers have lower rates with economy of scale? More importantly, people wanted to know, how did PSC's cost of serving 19,000 people in a very, very rural county compared to their overall service area, much of which is much more urban than Port Townsend and Jefferson County? A PSC executive later confirmed to me that yes, indeed, the obvious, PSC's capital and operating costs were higher in Jefferson County. We have a lot more trees per mile. We have a lot more power line miles per customer, and we also have a lot of storms and related problems. But like most utilities, including Jefferson PUD, PSC has a postage stamp rate, whether you're in Quilcene or you're in downtown Bellevue, the rate is the same. That's a really important point I want to come back to later in this presentation. But during that campaign in 2008, a lot of citizens made promises and predictions. But I can tell you, no one at the PUD ever said it'd be easy to do something that hadn't been done in more than half a century. Before I joined the board in 2010, after one of the members died suddenly, I knew it would take a lot more than 2 consultant reports, one prepared for PSC and the other for the PUD, to assess the feasibility of starting a power utility. I mean, each of those reports were just, a sheet of paper in my mind. But basically, you need 3 things to start a power utility. The first is a contract to buy power, if you're going to sell power. But if we were unable to purchase or to generate greener power than what we were getting from PSC, it was pretty hard to justify the effort to do this. And if the cost was too high for a lot of people, that would be a deal breaker. Second, an even bigger challenge is trying to finance this. Buying out PSC would be the largest public investment ever made in Jefferson County. This tiny little PUD had $2 million in the bank, had about $2.5 million in annual revenues from some water and sewer utilities. And of course, the third thing is a grid. The infrastructure owned by PSC, plus the new infrastructure you will need to connect to the Bonneville transmission system instead of PSC system. This is a lot of money and a lot of complication in doing that. And of course, PSC was not a willing seller, understandably. Now, we could have pursued condemnation, but we negotiated an acquisition. People bring that up from time to time. And of course, a lot of people say, well, why don't you just condemn it? You've got the power of eminent domain. The state law does say a private utility can't be bought out by a PUD and other such things. Well, yeah, that's the long and short of it. So you can establish what you think the value is. PSC will have its value. You go to Superior Court. The court will say, yeah, you're entitled to acquire this under condemnation, and PSC will take it to the State Court of Appeals, understandably. Go on eventually to the Washington Supreme Court. At some point, you get a letter from a court, unless you've made some horrific mistake along the way, saying, okay, yeah, you're right, you can come pick up the keys, here's the value the court's putting on it. Now, if you could imagine trying to start something as complicated as a power utility by being so, okay, it's yours, come on down. It's not like taking over a grocery store or a restaurant, which would be hard enough. If you think about what you need to do for billing, hiring people, your whole computer system, many of your operations, the complications of that, let alone, you got to finance all this. So you can't just go to, oh, it's going to happen. It's like when Tom Cruise in the movie A Few Good Men is going to put Nicholson on the stand. Oh, I just get it from him. Oh yeah, we're just going to finance that. We're just going to hire all these people. Well, many of the people were hired in advance. Trucks, other equipment you have to arrange for. And of course you have to work with Bonneville Power to get transmission. Yes, you're entitled to get it, but boy, that's just the short answer. It's not the real answer how to do these things. And so it made a lot of sense to negotiate a settlement. Otherwise, one would be horrific from a customer service and reliability standpoint. The other point, it would be much more expensive actually to do it that way. But if everybody who wasn't in the room, they don't know that's crazy, but let me tell you, that's what it took to get there. And it often reminded me what JFK said in 1962 about going to the moon. We don't do these things because they're easy, we do them because they're hard. They're very hard. Don't anybody leave with a different impression than that. PUD had 8 employees in 2008, okay? 8 employees. We didn't have the depth of the organization. We added more than 40 living wage jobs. We needed $115 million to finance the purchase and startup equipment, all of that stuff. Got a 28-year loan, 2.8%, that is cheaper than a home mortgage from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA. I don't believe that financing would be applicable here, but I don't know that. But if it's set up for rural communities, that was a really, really good deal. Equally important, again, is the power contract from the BPA, which is widely regarded as the cheapest and greenest power available. Yes, I recognize the salmon issue, and that's of paramount importance. At the same time, you really got a lot of green power, and you want a large partner that can help you with it, so you're not managing it, and the BPA is the way to go. And every 2 years, under the current plan, BPA makes additional power available for new utilities under the rate that they call Tier 1, which is a fancy name, or it's the cheapest rate that's available to preference customers, including public power. So they were going to have 50 megawatts available every 2 years. We needed a little bit less than that, so a lot of things went our way, and no one else You just start utility, that way we're the only ones that have the backbone to do it, I suppose, or the timing to do it. And we hired a retired USDA financial analyst, an engineer named Howard Barnes. We hired B&K engineers from Vancouver, Washington, to help put together a business plan to do this. It's very complicated. In-depth look at the financial feasibility of the operations, the physical condition, there's a lot of stuff to look at. But 5 years, this is lightning speed of government, 5 years after Prop 1 passed in 2008, we went electric. So instead of mostly carbon-based power generated from coal and natural gas, we now have virtually carbon-free power from BPA. Here's what's important to you carbon folks out here, should be important. The switch from PSC to the PUD reduced our county's total carbon footprint by 25%. I know this stuff used to be on the carbon committee for the whole county. Imagine taking your whole county and saying, whoa, trying to reduce by 80%. Well, here's 25% right here. You're welcome. But that's a huge deal. But like most communities, where's your power, where's your carbon get generated by? One is electricity, the second is building heat, and the third is transportation. So electricity is virtually carbon-free. Those other two sources, though, transportation and building heat, are a real opportunity to make further carbon reductions, number one. Number two, equally important, save customers money. And here's where the other two commissioners really thought it was nuts. And generate more revenue for the utility. And when I was on the board, I tried to point out how incentives for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and various other those are just easy steps to do. Those are the easy steps. But if you don't have a second board member interested in doing anything beyond generic and watered down goals and strategies, those things get shelved. And that's how democracy works. But you look at things like conservation, which is very important for every electric and water utility, okay? When you have conservation, what happens? You sell less power, revenues come down. So your two choices are, oh, we could raise rates and see how popular that is, or we can say, there are other people out there who are buying electricity. Of course, the most obvious one is electric vehicles. It's a huge profit maker for utilities. They're buying at night, the regular customers plug in. This is great. Water heaters, I'm a mom and pop landlord, done this forever. One of my rentals had a propane water heater in it. My tenants think, this is the greatest landlord I ever had. I said, yeah, put in an electric water heater. Not only electric, but it's got a built-in heat pump. So they're saving a fortune to begin with, to get rid of the carbon. And then an electric water heater would have been $400 a year, normally, but it's $100 a year if you have a heat pump because it's so efficient, okay? I don't get a rebate from the PUD for doing that, but there's $100 going to the PUD every year. It wasn't going there before. So if you've got more and more people conserving because they have a heat pump in their house, well, you better go out there and see other ways that we can electrify things to reduce carbon and to save people money. And it makes money for the PUD. Others thought I was nuts, but that is the truth. And you look a little crazy when you try to think strategically about where you're trying to go. And I try to say people that carbon should be the overarching guideline in everything you do in the utility, but frequently that's not the case. I mean, obviously safety, reliability, but carbon when you think of rates and when you think of strategies for where you're going. So what's it look like now? Set up PSC's contract linemen driving over the Hood Canal Bridge during outages. All of our employees live in Jefferson County, East Jefferson County. Our apprentice linemen graduated from local high schools. There's one kid telling me, grew up in Quilcene, and he wrote a letter to PUD, so I want to be a lineman. You know, so, well, we don't know if we're going to do this or not. A couple years later, he's one of our linemen. And when an apprentice, another guy too from Chimicum, and one of our field people. I'm sorry, I still think about this. Single mom, waitress, new career. Sorry, she's quite sick. Just stop for a second. Anyway, talk about the boring stuff. We continue to invest in the grid we bought from PSC. A lot of things to reduce outage time, to improve reliability, to save money. We've done a lot of really smart things in that area. And the PUD, by what people try to tell you otherwise, has always paid its bills on time. And we've met and we've exceeded the debt coverage requirements of our lenders. Always. Never missed that. We had $2 million in cash when we started this. We had 12 million 3 years later. People will tell you things otherwise. It's not true. But if you think that rates, and we talked about rates a little bit earlier, more important than carbon-free power, the living wage jobs, local control, let's talk about rates. We set our initial rates at exactly what PSC was charging at the time of switchover. For most of the first 3.5 years, PSC was charging more than the PUD. As I said earlier, we bought the most expensive part of the whole system. We didn't have to buy the whole thing, we could have just bought Port Townsend. But our three commissioners said, no, we want to serve the whole county. We recognize it's more expensive in Quilcene and Discovery Bay and the Coil, but it's the right thing to do. Everybody pay taxes and do it for everybody. So that was a good thing. And then last year, our rate was about $1 a month higher than the PSC. Then this year, more recently, PSC is decreasing streets a little bit. So the PUD is a little bit higher now than PSC is. And of course, we are serving that most expensive part of their whole huge territory. Here we are out in the sticks with all those trees and power lines. But if we'd stayed with PSC, never mind the carbon issue for just a microsecond, but we'd be concerned with the cost of shutting down that big coal plant in Montana, among other things. In our PUD, just like most utilities, it has discounts for low-income and disabled customers. We offer solar and conservation incentives just like other utilities do. And let me note, there was a comment here from Jim about the rates. Well, I wasn't in favor of making that base higher, but this is how democracy works. You got a board. There are some people that would have made that fee, $50, $60 a month. Well, that's your fixed cost. Well, that's true. But you want to create a model that is strategic. Yes, it's true that the average customer is paying $100 a month. Maybe $60 of that is fixed cost for debt and staff and so on. But you want to set it in a way that have people incentives to do the right things to solve climate, among other things. Some people would just say, oh, here's what the average other utility, why don't we charge that? I don't belong to that school. But it takes the right people to run a PUD when you get it going. But when the PUD owns, when the community owns the utility as the ratepayer, it's not a foreign-owned corporation that decides what's in the community's best interest. And with a private utility, the goal is very clear. It's to maximize the return for the shareholders. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a different incentive than what you could have if you have what it takes to go public. And with PSC, you couldn't just call up the board of directors or have any real say in the utility. But our PUD has a citizens advisory board, 3 people from each of the 3 areas of the county that help weigh in on different issues, whether it's incentives for different things, or what the rate structure should be, or electric vehicle charging, and of course, smart meters. There's a spirited debate going on right now about going to smart meters. I'm just glad that when you have a local public utility, you're kind of working that out on your own. You're not having a big corporation or the State Utilities Transportation Commission making that decision for you. But make no mistake, launching a community-owned power utility is a very difficult thing to do. Remember the movie Moneyball? Brad Pitt is the manager of the team. Oh, we'll get everybody to play first base. And that old first baseman says, it's very difficult. This is really difficult. You can play first base if you can do this. That's what I think. My advice is to heed the 5 truths about power utilities. I've seen this held up over and over again. I'm sure Steve can agree with this. Number 1, everything is very complicated and difficult. Doesn't matter what it is. Number 2, it takes a long time to do just about anything. Number 3, nothing, and I repeat, nothing is cheap in the world of power. Number 4, there's a large group of stakeholders from near and far, and they all have enthusiastic and competing agendas that affect everything you do with the utility. That's all life is. And number 5, and perhaps most important in life, is no one gets everything that they want. But now we're in the post-truth era. So I think it's appropriate to balance that. I want to offer 3 more truths about running a power utility. Very few people have a good understanding of what it takes to run an electric utility. People are busy. They got things to do. Most of them simply want affordable, reliable power, and find that out when the power goes out. People call them, but you know that that's what's important to them. Most of them do want it in various shades of green, provided it's affordable and reliable and not politicized. Number 2 in these new truths, among the customers with the most strident opinions on power utilities are, number 1, climate change deniers, and number 2, opponents of smart meters. Now, I brought this up to the other board members on the board. I said, we're going to go to smart meters. We need to have a very good public engagement campaign, because this is an important issue for a lot of people. Everybody looked at me like, well, no, I'm trying to tell you that a lot of people, no. it's like the anti-vaxxers and the 9/11 truthers. A lot of people have strong opinions. There's no shortage of websites and organizations stoke these kind of ideas. It'll take a lot of time and utility. I'm willing to, if there's a question, that I can highlight some of the advantages of smart meters and offer those for your consideration. I don't want to take over time debating the climate science or the science of how radio frequency is calculated with cell phones and smart meters. But those are the kind of things that you'll deal with in utility. But for good reason, there's a lot of optimism, at least in my mind, for the role of electric utilities in mitigating climate change. But there is no free lunch, especially with 12 years to get that lunch in. I made a presentation, within the last year or so, and a woman came up to me before and she said, boy, I'm glad you're here. You know, we want to do what you did. We want to go 100% solar and have cheaper rates. And I took a deep breath and I said, well, those are great goals, and right now they are mutually exclusive, but don't let that stop you from thinking that at least it's a different path. If your community wants to go a certain way, you can trade those things off. But right now, if you look at the technologies for storage and so on, there's a lot of reasons it's not really practical. On the other hand, at least if the community is in the driver's seat, you can sort these things out and make a path forward that people can agree to. And the other thing to be optimistic about is things are changing so fast in the power world, except for those 5 truths, that the fastest and I think the most difficult way to have the kind of future you want is to start your own utility, if you have the appetite for that, and really think about what it takes to do this. I would suggest a couple of things for reading if you want to learn more and really get a sense not only for utility, but also if carbon is the most important thing to you as it is to me. Think about these 2 things together before you think what kind of way can we get a utility to do these things. Google the phrase 7th power plan, just like it sounds, 7th power plan. There's an organization, and you do not need to write down this acronym, but it's NWPCC, it's the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. That is a consortium of public utilities, including PUDs and other body-built customers, and they do a lot of different things, but every several years they update the plan for how do we provide power. Because we're a bunch of utilities with different territories, a lot of us buy from Bonneville, some from Railroad, and we kind of look at the whole enchilada and say what's the best way going forward. The 7th power plan is their most current version of this. If you Google that, there's a longer version, like 40 pages, but there's like a summary that's 2 or 3 pages. It's absolutely worth reading. In fact, the 3 of its key findings may surprise you, particularly coming from power utilities. These are the 3 most fascinating findings out of it, and really the key to the whole understanding, I think, of how to solve climate with utilities, or help solve climate. There is a surplus of power generation capacity in the Northwest. Probably, are we supposed to be? No, there's actually a surplus if you just look at it from the numbers. Second thing, conservation, not generation, is the most cost-effective way to meet load growth. So if more people move in this, we don't actually need to build more plants. It's cheaper to get people to conserve, whether that's demand management and some other things, but real conservation. Third, conservation, not generation, is the most cost-effective way to address climate change. I think that's okay. So if you're a utility and you want to do something about climate change, conservation is the most important thing you could be doing. But for extra credit, I think you read what James Hansen has. People heard of James Hansen, the retired NASA scientist, all you carbon people know. I think he's great because he's one of the few people who's got the backbone to just call things as he sees it, and that would certainly save a lot of time here as well as in the other Washington. But I love his thoughts about climate change, the Paris Agreement, and what it's going to take to meet the need for power in the future. And I think 2 of the most important opinions that he have are really interesting because people at each end of the political spectrum, they like one of those opinions and despise the other and then flip-flop on the other end of the spectrum. But Hansen said, and I'm just going to paraphrase, number 1, he said that the Paris Agreement is simply not enough to prevent the forthcoming climate catastrophe. It's just not enough. And people think, oh, we're going to do this. No, whether Trump's in or not, this is not, it's a spit in the ocean. The second thing he said, to get more attention I think in this group, is that there is no credible path to solving climate change as quickly as we need to and meet the world's need for electricity without a significant role for nuclear power. He was not going to get popularity doing that. I admire him for saying, look at how we're going to get from here to there. I'm not going to try to change anybody's mind on either of those issues. Personally, I think he's probably right on both of them. You're not going to start climate change by just driving a Prius and canvas bags at the grocery store. This is really fundamental stuff. We heard those numbers earlier about reduce your driving carbon by this huge percentage. But this is the advantage of having carbon-free power. If you plug in your Prius or let's call it Nissan Leaf or your Tesla, as some have, you plug it in Olympia. Well, it's not nearly as advantageous as Port Townsend because you've got carbon. It's like, if you think of it, all the implications that people plug in where we are, okay, they're carbon-free and they're helping the business model of the local utilities. But I think that the defeat of the carbon measure this week just shows how difficult it is to get the average person to even do a little bit about carbon. I mean, people want things just like homeless. Oh, we're not going to pay that. We're not going to have that. Well, okay, so we're going to have $200 martinis, but we're not going to have a solution for homeless people. So to wrap up, I am a brief speaker, I hope. Using electricity generated with coal and natural gas is not our only choice. It's just a cheap and easy choice, and in my view, it's the one that accelerates the slow motion catastrophe known as global warming, climate change. I think it's up to you to decide if you want to have carbon-free power, affordable power, living wage jobs, local control, and if that's what you want, are you willing to do what it takes to do it? I just can't emphasize enough. It's just not, just voting on this, but it's a lot of hard work with a lot of unhappy choices along the way. But there were 3 ballot initiatives on November 2008 pertaining to power utilities. The only one that passed was Prop 1 in Jefferson County. It was a citizen initiative. It wasn't sponsored by the PUD. It's the only one that was successful. Why was that? In my view, it's because the citizens, ordinary citizens, did all the heavy lifting. They learned about electric utilities, like all the stuff that you don't really want to know about them, but you have to understand. They created a vision for how a community-owned utility could have significant and lasting benefits, and they worked tirelessly to educate and engage voters. PSC spent a boatload of money. The other side spent very little, but people said, it was like citizens from Apple Pie and PSC or whatever. People are like, come on. And like was mentioned, they opened a little office downtown, had a couple of people in it when they closed their service center years ago. And people said, okay, we're going to try this. And it's been hard, and it's not been perfect. But I tell you what, would I do it again in a heartbeat? Thank you very much.
Roll on, Columbia, roll on.